to another, it's not really a health detective podcast. I think we can call these Dr. Lori Rose specials now. That's going to be the official name of these little monthly segments that we're doing. We do have the woman, the myth, the legend, Dr. Lori Rose with us today. And this topic for this month is all about the scientific literacy course that she created. So I'm very excited to chat about this one. I was supposed to have done the course at this time before recording this, and I've done very little, Dr. Lori Rose. I've done very little. And so
homework.
Yeah, well, you know what? I sat down and I said, if I know not enough about it, I'm going to ask great questions. I'm going to come from a genuine place of ignorance. So that's my justification. I did get it, though, so I'm really excited to go through it.
So you dabbled enough to get curious enough to ask great questions. That's what you did.
That's one way to put it. So we'll go with that today. But for those that don't know, maybe this is their first time on our YouTube page, Facebook page. They're like, okay, who the heck are these guys? So my name's Evan Transu. I do the Health Detective podcast for us. That's why I kind of joked that it's not another podcast episode. I also do course enrollment. So if you're interested in the course, you might end up talking to someone like myself or even me personally about if the course is a good fit for you. And Dr. Lori, who are you?
Who am I? So that's such a broad question, but I'll just put it in a sentence with a lot of commas, right? So I'm Lori Rose. I have a PhD in biology. I created and teach a college level holistic wellness program, and I'm a content creator for FDN. Nice. Among myriad other things that I'm leaving out.
Yes. So yeah, who is the FDN, Dr. Lori Rose? I think that was a good explanation. And in terms of the content creation, right, we're not talking like social media content, although this could be used on social. What we're talking about today is these wonderful courses that you create for us with your areas of expertise. And I wanted to highlight the scientific literacy one today. One, because if you remember us talking last time, I didn't even understand that it was you who was teaching that. But I remember when it first came out, and this is true, I messaged Kay Marie at the time, who is someone who works very high up at FDN. I said, that is brilliant that we're finally putting that in, because I think one of the main issues that we have, not only in FDN, but in the world of the online certifications and health stuff, is you have these very educated people that actually know what they're talking about. They really can help someone with the health side, but then they're out there sometimes feeling like they have to compete with the PhDs of the world that can fully understand a scientific paper and see whether or not it's good or bad. And this is something that goes way farther. It's a way bigger issue than just FDN practitioners and functional health coaches. I remember, and I'm not condemning it one way or the other, I'm just sharing a story. So there was a documentary that came out years ago called like What the Health or something along those lines. And that was a vegan documentary. And they were citing all these things. They were showing all the science, making it sound really good. The owner of vegan.com, who shockingly is a vegan, actually came out. You can still read this to this day. You just search What the Health on their website. Came out and said, we do not want to be associated with such an unscientific documentary. We are all for veganism. We're all for animal rights. We don't want to be associated with that. And even though I'm not a vegan myself, I got to say, I have the highest level of respect for someone who could have milked that documentary to no end, because it was really big at the time and everyone was buying it. And it still would have favored them. And they came out and said, no, that's not science, though. We need to focus on that. So it tricks everyone. It's getting into the mainstream, high-level documentaries, and people are buying this. So we got to understand how to read stuff. So where can we even begin? Like, what do you see as a major problem when people are, on Facebook or on Instagram sharing, hey, I read this study? What do you think people are missing? Is it just they don't know how to read it at all and they're only going by the abstract or the headline? What do you think the biggest problem is?
Oh, I think it's multiple levels. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I noticed when I first started teaching college biology majors 15 years ago. And I noticed there's a huge gap between a real understanding of what science is and having a critically thinking mind towards claims versus being able to recite the scientific method, which we've all learned how to do since third grade, right? People could tell me the definition of science and what the scientific method is, but they absolutely could not do science. And anyone who's attended like let's say you've had a biology lab, right? And your lab and this could be like high school level biology, and your lab instructor tells you what to do, you do it, you can answer some memorization questions about it. But then if anyone were to ask you process level, functional level, comprehension level understanding of what you did, or the science behind what you did, or say, hey, now design your own experiment doing this, you can't do it. So it's a problem that starts at the very basic K through 12 education level of science. But then there's also a problem at the academic level of scientists versus non-scientists, and the perspective that the scientific world has created out of ego,
Mhm.
of like only scientists can understand science, and they use such big words and fancy language that make science unavailable to people who don't have the training.
Mhm.
And so, one, there's a lack of education from childhood. Two, there's this kind of fear that has been created. I don't know if it was on purpose or not, but right now, only scientists can understand
Mm.
science and everyone else is on the outside. And then three, what you mentioned is this wealth of knowledge and claims. And whereas news used to just be news to inform us, news is now there to sensationalize
Mm.
and get clicks. And so science was supposed to be created to inform the common man. News was supposed to have been created to inform the common man. And so was education.
Mm.
And so now all three of those levels are missing part of the boat. And so here we are, no matter what field we're in, but absolutely in our field where we are trying to help people with all of these holistic products and all of these holistic claims. And some of them are absolute hooey and some of them are fabulous.
Hmm.
And so I actually use the What the Health documentary and that woman's sort of denial of
Of
it.
course you know this. I saw you
All of
shaking
my
your head. I'm like, does
I
she know
use
about
that
this? Of
in my
course.
yeah, in my very first nutrition course in my holistic wellness pathway program, because I'm like, this is a quintessential example of what's happening. And if you fall for it, you are going to look like you don't know what you're doing and like you can't help people and like you just fall for anything. Because that's what it's out there to get us to do, right? Like all of those things are out there to get us to fall for whatever their product is, buy whatever their product is, and to promote whatever their product is. And so developing both an understanding of science, which isn't that complicated, and a critically thinking mind, which also isn't that complicated. They're each just a series of steps that I teach in this course. Then you can have the confidence of knowing, oh, here's a claim. How can I investigate this claim? How can I make sure that what they're saying is real? And how can I make sure the solutions I'm choosing for myself are legit and the solutions that I'm offering to my clients are legit?
Yeah. I love all this so much, and I haven't really once gotten to hear your passion behind. Well, I've heard your passion, to be clear, but I haven't heard your passion behind this particular subject, and I think it's so cool. And of course, like I said, you're the one person out of all the people I've told this to with the vegan.com thing. I did see you shaking your head. I'm like, okay, does she know what I'm talking about? Is she
I
just
knew
being supportive?
exactly what you were
Go
talking about.
figure.
I
So
didn't make it 5 minutes through that movie without turning it off. I was like, this is a bunch of sensationalist nonsense, but it's used by every vegan to justify the vegan diet, which there are plenty of scientific things to justify the vegan diet, but that movie has none of them and it twists everything. And I thought it was so honorable that she came out despite her personal bias and said, this is not science and we don't want to be associated with people using this sensationalist nonsense as part of our group of
yes,
people. And that's what it's going to take, right? It's going to take people saying something that you stand 100% behind, but they're saying it in a sensationalist way for you to call them out on it and be like, nope, this isn't how we get there.
yeah.
Right? We may want to promote holistic health, but we better do it in a scientifically sound way, or we look like charlatans.
Yeah, I and I want to touch on this critical thinking aspect. I don't know if that's necessarily part of the course. We'll obviously get to the specifics of that. But the critical thinking thing is so important. And I know it might seem simple to you, but to me, it's already like, okay, you can see why this person's a critical thinker yourself. You said the documentary, I couldn't even keep it on for 5 minutes. But there's plenty of evidence showing why a vegan diet might be beneficial. And I know that sounds so simple on the surface, but the reality of it is most people, and I think most people are perfectly capable of critical thinking. And I'm not in any way suggesting that, I am a self-proclaimed critical thinker. I do believe that most of the people in my life, almost annoyingly so, believe that I've always been the how and why person too much. I was 4 or 5 years old questioning my parents, like legitimately, on God, on Santa, on all this stuff. And I wanted them to show me stuff that could prove these things to me. And they're like, dude, we're still trying to figure it out, right? Minus the Santa part. And so it was just, I've always had that curiosity. And I think a lot of the critical thinking comes with the curiosity, but it also has to come with a certain level of, dare I use the word humility, which also might not be a word that gets used around me a lot. But humility in the sense that we want quick answers as humans. And I totally get that. So do I, right? I want to know what happens after we die. I want to know what the best diet is. I want to know what the best way to do XYZ thing is. And the truth of the matter is, science is very cool. Science is this amazing tool, but it's not that straightforward. And you have to be able to humor multiple thoughts at once. You can't just find the first thing and say, oh, that must be it. And I think it's actually, we've moved so far away from this as a society, this idea of humoring other things. I don't know if we were ever there, I suppose. I'm pretty young, so maybe we were never there. But it almost throws people off when you even question it. And a basic example of this is I typically, because I have to present sometimes to people who are much more educated than me. They got all the letters after or before their name, and I have nothing. I went to a semester and a half of community college, and I'm up there proclaiming that, hey, I had 7 different diagnosed conditions, and I don't have them anymore, and I'm going to show you how I did that, which I always understand is a bold undertaking. So one of the meta-analyses that I always reference was this one done that showed the efficacy of things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in the temporary relieving of symptoms for anxiety and depression. So, of course, the first thing that I'm using that for is I'm suggesting that perhaps there's a neuroinflammatory link with the mental health side. People, when they hear that, they're like, okay, that makes sense, right? You took a anti-inflammatory drug and it led to that. But then I say, but it could be a side effect, even though it's a very slim chance, in my opinion. It could be a side effect that we don't understand. And they say, well, wait, what are you talking about? They took an Advil, anti-inflammation, and then they don't have the mental health issues temporarily, right? I say, well, sure, but that's not what this study is looking at. The study just showed the association between people having a lessening of symptoms when they took these things. That does not mean that there's not some odd side effect that Advil has or NSAIDs have that maybe your serotonin and dopamine gets boosted. I understand that's incredibly low probability. I probably could have had a better example, but I think we're so quick to search for and make these conclusionary statements. We want to say, no, this is it. But it's even with great studies, even with a meta-analysis, it's not that simple, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And what you just demonstrated is what I try to instill in people when I'm teaching this is that taking the first explanation for a story that has been told by an experiment, it's a lazy approach. And what they should be doing in their papers as scientists is saying, this is one explanation, but here's something else that could explain this, and here's something else that could explain this, and here's something else that could explain this, because there are so many factors happening all at the same time that could be influencing the results of an experiment. And what it takes is brutal honesty.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, like that kind of honesty of admitting the absolute unknown, despite this like pretty picture that, oh, this explanation makes it sensational and amazing and let's stick with that. No, it takes humility and it takes being able to say, like, we don't know everything. And maybe it is like this curiosity thing, but something I want to kind of bring more to light that you said is, yes, I think there are some people that are like born critical thinkers and born curious, but it is also something that can be trained.
100%.
Because there are people who tend to just like, I shouldn't have said lazy, I shouldn't have said that. There are certain personalities that will, just go with the flow, accept the first, that aren't like this um skeptical mindset.
I'm
And
like, say
both
it,
of those
Lori. Yeah.
mindsets have pros and cons, right? They have pros and cons, and one isn't lazy and the other one isn't better. And so I retract that. But I do say that in questioning the validity of claims, we can be trained to have that critical thinking mind.
100. Well, and think about what I even just said with the meta-analysis. That's not a profound thought to say, well, this isn't a conclusion. This is just showing the association. So it could be something else. It could be 100 different things that we don't know about. I absolutely believe that can be trained. I love the word that you used with skeptical, because I saw automatically where you were going with that, because I'm so skeptical to the point that it's been a detriment in my life. I'm
Right.
skeptical of people. I'm skeptical of what they're trying to do with me. What do you want out of this relationship? Either a friendship, intimate one, whatever. It's actually been a huge problem. So
Mhm.
it's quite useful, coincidentally, from a scientific perspective, to have that inherent skepticism in you. But then again, there's pros and cons to everything. And so the people that might be more willing to just receive something at face value, oh, what the hell said it? Okay, cool, I'll go save the animals now, are the same people that are probably pretty damn cool to deal with in your daily life, because they're just
Right.
nice, and they're agreeable, and they're just like, all right, cool, that sounds
Yes,
good.
agreeable has never been a word to describe me. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, and so it's cool how that can work out. Now, with the course itself, I mean, it's not like you can sit on this course and get 100 hours worth of content, because you condensed, it seems, a lot of the best stuff that into pretty straightforward. I think it's like 2.5, 3 hours of stuff. So what will people actually get? What is your goal for them when they go through this? They will have this mindset before and then have this mindset or area of knowledge afterwards.
Absolutely. So if someone feels doubtful or just not equipped or skilled at understanding science, investigating science, even knowing what science is, like if I said to you, set up an experiment to see how A affects B. If that scares you or you feel like you couldn't do that, you will learn how to do that in this program. If you feel like there's a claim and you want to figure out if that claim is legit or not, but you don't feel confident knowing the resources to do it, the tools to do it, or the skills to do it, like to open up a scientific paper and be like, okay, now what do I do? What do I do with all these big, ridiculous, fancy words instead of something that the common man understands?
Mm.
How do I do that?
Yeah.
I will teach you how to do that. So the goal of this is to, one, help you understand science and help you be able to look at and critically think about science. And then two, if you are a person who sees a claim, or if that, like, let's say you've mastered not believing a Facebook line or a media line. Let's say you're like, I only look at .edu sources and I only look at summaries of the actual articles. But do you then go into the article and say, did they set this up right? Did they ask the question correctly? Did they know enough about this to use the correct doses and the correct dependent variables and independent variables? Did they use a graph that tricks us into thinking something looks one way versus another because there's a bias? Did their claim match what they actually found, or was it correlational? If you don't think that way, this course will teach you to think that way. So you don't even take a scientific study at face value, because science, the process is very simple and straightforward and infallible.
Yeah.
Science. However, science is done by humans, and humans are fallible. Humans have a lack of knowledge when they don't admit it. Humans have bias that either accidentally lead them towards wrong conclusions or very purposefully lead them towards presenting conclusions that look a way that they shouldn't. And so and the solutions to all of these things that are taking me this long to say are actually very short and straightforward. And so this course isn't like a sit back and listen course.
Mm-hmm.
This course is here are the steps. Let's do the steps.
Nice.
Because you're not going to learn to understand science without doing science. And so I walk you through the thought process. I have you do the thought process. And so by the end of this very short course, you will be confident and at least know how to be a critical thinker should you choose to want to critically think about something.
Wonderful. I know this seems almost naive because I haven't gone through it myself, but I remember believing this even when it first came out, just from understanding what was promised about it. I really think I might push for this once I'm done with it. I almost believe that this should be a part of the main FDN curriculum. It's not like you're sitting there again adding 100 hours of content time. It's very little comparatively speaking to some of the other stuff, but it's so important just to have this idea because we have some very advanced practitioners here, and I'm very grateful for that. And again, I'm not saying I don't mess stuff up all the time. I'm sure I do, but it's kind of one of those things where you know how they talk about you don't know that you don't know something. I at least know where I don't know stuff, and I try to be careful. But I'll see all the time, for example, you know, people posting stuff saying infrared saunas have been proven to do this, that, and the next thing. I'm like, no, they haven't. And I have a business where we have an infrared sauna in there, but we had people come in and say, "Oh my gosh, I heard this is so good for fibromyalgia." I'm like, yes, those are anecdotes. And anecdotes are really important, in my opinion, in functional medicine because we have huge companies with unlimited bank accounts, seemingly, that are very against us finding out whether or not our holistic stuff works. So anecdotes are important, but I need the consumers when they come into my place to understand, no, this is not, there's no thing showing that this is magic for fibromyalgia. If it makes you feel good, it's not going to kill you. That's for sure. It doesn't seem dangerous, but you need to understand the difference between, oh, 3 times a week, doing this for a month, all of a sudden your fibromyalgia is gone, versus I'm doing this because it helps me feel better. And very likely this is not the only thing I'll ever need to do. Or, you know, I'm actually happy to share this transparently. I don't mind. Right before we got on, I told you I was on a call with the doctor that I used to do some peptide stuff. So I'm using BPC 157. I have found amazing anecdotal benefits from this. It's not medical advice. You guys go do your own stuff. But I found amazing anecdotal benefits from it. When you read a lot of the research, almost all of it regarding BPC is on, let's just call it, not humans. They're different animals, guys. And so I'm taking a calculated risk with that, thinking that, all right, using it on the short term, I've seen a bunch of other people do it. Anecdotally, it's incredible what it has done for me in terms of like healing. If I get an injury or something from weightlifting or jiu-jitsu or whatever it might be, it's like almost unbelievable what it does. But I am taking a risk because I don't have studies showing that this is perfectly safe to use in human beings. I don't think anyone that's just the average person does this. And I don't think a lot of FDNs or other functional practitioners are doing this. That's why I almost wish this was a part of the curriculum, because at least then you could take a calculated risk. But there's people doing things that they don't understand are risks. They just think, oh, this is going to work. I'm going to be fine. And my UC's gone because I took BPC or something like that.
Right, exactly. No, and I agree. I think it should be part of human curriculum. Like, I think every human being especially now where all information is at the, you just type something in and you can find claims about everything. And so I just think it's so important. I was doing it with my biology students before I even got into holistic health. It was something I immediately changed the way I taught labs. I no longer told them, okay, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and you're spitting out this. I would go in there and I would say, all right, we need to see how A affects B. Y'all set it up. How are we going to set it up? What are all the different ways we can set it up? What results are we looking for? What do we want to measure? What do we want to, and they designed every single lab. And by the time I did this throughout the semester, there was a huge difference in a comprehension and understanding of science, and also in critical thinking. And when I got into the holistic health field and then I created my holistic program, it was something that I didn't let go. I was like, this is required. Like, I cannot not have them understand science. So it's part of the very first course, and then I include it in every single course after it. So it's not a background of how I train my students. It's a foundation of how I train my students, and it's repeated throughout 2 years of holistic education. We don't just do it once, we do it all the time.
Love it.
And so this course it's so short to remove any intimidation, and it makes it very inexpensive, and so it's very accessible. And even if someone's listening who's not in the holistic field, I think it benefits literally every human on the planet right now.
Yeah. Can we actually, if you guys don't mind, can we have one of the team members, please? Can you drop the link? Because this is something that, and it's going to be under our advanced courses. This is something that anyone can take, even the public. I think it's listed at what, $97 or something, which is so crazy, but that's besides the point. So definitely check this out. But you were talking about everyone in the world and that we need it right now. And I do think that's the case. So I want to ask a personal question in terms of how you deal with this stuff. How, and this is, we're not getting into opinions, guys. I think we can have an adult conversation about stuff that goes on in the world. Like, my goodness. And you're one of the few people I trust to have this conversation with. How do we navigate a world where the reality is, and this is true, we know, for example, Monsanto got sued because they had a Stanford scientist ghostwrite studies for them. And so the study might even look great, and they're paying off people at some of the most prestigious universities in the world to do this. Money's buying that, right? How do we, and kind of within the same scope, how do we navigate a world where over the last several years, obviously, science of one particular thing was pushed very hard. And I'm not even saying I disagree with that. That's what I'm saying, guys. This is not an opinion. I'm just saying it was pushed very hard, but then we still have these personal choices. And some people are saying that, well, yeah, the personal choice is the smartest thing. Others are saying, yeah, you're entitled to your personal choice, but you're an idiot for that. And then there's a third level, which is, no, science says this, so you don't even have the entitlement to a personal choice. So I know this, I kind of just hit you with a few questions at once, but I think you get the overarching theme. How do we navigate a world like that?
Yeah, it became, so this was a topic that I've taught, like I said, for 15 years. And it became very even the word science became so controversial over the last 2 years. And you're right, there were two camps, and both camps were saying the exact same thing about each other. If the science says it, you can't have an opinion about it. We're saying these people believe everything they see. Mm-hmm. But then these people had the same legit claim, like, you're saying the same thing, it's just the scientists are saying it. And so you're believing everything they say, you're believing everything the holistic whatever says, yep. And then everything in between. And it got very personal and super sad. And so there's a social aspect to all of this. And it's important to distinguish, like, the scientific method is there to investigate what's happening. And then society has to decide what to do with that. And those are two very different things that obviously overlap. Part of critical thinking, and really the scientific literacy, that you just gave me an idea, because the scientific literacy course doesn't get into the critical thinking steps as deep as I go into them with my students. And now I kind of want to
round two,
critical thinking
scientific literacy round two, baby.
Because, and I don't get into this in the course, but I'm going to bring it up now. Part of critical thinking is understanding that every human has a different bias, and every human has different experiences. And those biases and experiences are going to lead them to different options and choices and conclusions. And we cannot exclude the individuality of allowing people what their experiences have led them to choose. Mm-hmm. And then there's like, oh, but can we? And when should we? All this social stuff on top of that. I don't have the answer to that.
Sure.
But critical thinking helps people be more open-minded to other people's choices that are not their choices, and helps them see, like, oh, I understand why they're doing this, instead of calling this side idiots and this side idiots. No, we're all people with different experiences that are going to lead us to different choices.
Man, I love this so much, and I love the recognition of the different biases we have, because that's another thing, right? Again, we all want these quick answers, so we're not even willing to look at our own stuff. And so for myself, right, I know that I have that skeptical side. I'm like, well, I don't even really trust your stuff when it first comes out, so I'm hesitant there. I have a bias of thinking you can't tell me what to do, type of thing. But at least I can say this out loud, right?
Right.
And I know that that is affecting me in some way. Maybe my blind spot is I don't know how badly it's affecting me, but I can at least sit down with you on this live and say, I know I'm that type of person, and I know that could affect me in a negative way, potentially, because I'm so biased in that sense. But I do appreciate your perspective, and thank you for being honest with that, because science is there for a reason. It's very useful. In fact, if we didn't have science, I don't think I'd be as healthy as I am today after suffering with all these health issues. But at the same time, the media almost was pushing it in such a way that it was replacing people's like God. And I don't mean a certain religious God, a God of a certain religion. I just mean it was almighty. It was all ruling. And we're sitting here talking about the inherent flaws in science. We can
Yes.
never have
Yes.
100% precise answers. So there's these very large and quite frankly interesting social and philosophical questions of, okay, how wrong can science be? How wrong does it need to be before we just say, okay, no one should have to, oblige to anything? If it's right to a 99% degree, does that mean you automatically lose personal choice because we know that we're helping out a bunch of people with it? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that either, but it's fascinating stuff. And no one's asking that because you're right. We're too busy yelling at each other back and forth about
Yeah.
basically who's stupider.
Right. And no, here's what's missing from that conversation. Well, there's so much, but I'm going to say a couple things. One, science is just a method. So science is not right or wrong. Science is a method. Science is done by people, and people are inherently fallible. There are so many studies that show that based on how the scientist thinks the outcome is going to be, they will subconsciously mismeasure things, design things certain ways, and they do it under the guise of like, no, I'm going to be completely objective and completely unbiased, and it still happens with the best of human intentions. And so if you talk to most objective scientists, they will admit that the people doing science are flawed, and that is why science is supposed to be tested and checked and tested and checked and tested and checked. Most objective scientists will not say this is this. That's not objective, and that doesn't support the scientific method and what science is.
Yes.
It also doesn't recognize the fallibility of the humans that have to do the science. Another thing missing is that there are other ways of knowing things, and you've brought them up. Not everything has been tested by science. Not everything is going to be allowed by certain industries to be tested by science. Not everything will be funded to be tested by science. Some things that are tested by science are set up so ridiculously that the science around them is just is unusable. And so we can't just make science our only way of knowing. We can't make it omniscient, and we can't make it all powerful. There are other ways of knowing things and making choices, and also people doing science are imperfect. And if someone isn't admitting that, and they're just taking science at face value, like other people are taking media titles at face value, right? And so those are both the exact same approach on different sides of the coin.
Got it. I think we could do this conversation probably for a couple hours. This is legitimately one of my favorite conversations I've had with you, and that's saying something. I love the way that you think, and it's very refreshing in today's world to just be able to have this conversation. I feel like you and I could grab coffee, we could touch on politics, religion, everything, and still leave friends, even if there's major differences there, which is an amazing thing to be able to say in today's world. So, in conclusion, here, when we're talking about this advanced course, it should be required for all the FDNs out there. I'll go through it. Follow the Health Detective podcast. I'll give you guys my review once I'm all done there. But holy cow, if you're just in the general public, even if you're not a practitioner and you somehow clicked on this for whatever reason, maybe go consider checking it out. It's one of the most affordable advanced courses that we have. I think it's like the second cheapest somehow. And you can see the passion that goes behind this, and you'll learn a lot so that you can go out in the world and make more informed decisions. And I think I could be wrong. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'll ask you directly. It almost seems like your philosophy on this is something very similar to mine. I do believe that the individual choice of the person, that is a right, and that should proceed everything. However, what we should be doing is educating people at a high level and giving them courses like this. It doesn't have to be indoctrinated education. They can learn from something like this so that we can all make better and more informed personal decisions. This way you can better the society, which is what, one philosophical argument is, but at the same time you empower the individual and still keep their rights intact, which is obviously an argument from the other side. We can get the best of both worlds, I think. We just need to educate people, and people have the personal responsibility of taking the time to do stuff like this and really learning things.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I'm going to make a critical thinking course because I realized through this conversation, like I talk about how to critically think about a scientific paper, but I didn't talk about critically thinking in general about all things. And so we'll have another conversation about that because it's going to be really funny what shows up on people's like, they can't admit. I asked them, say what would happen if you were wrong. They can't do it. Say what your bias is. They can't do it. Type in the exact opposite of what you think into Google. They can't do it. Like there's such a hesitancy to understand the other side of people's opinions that are opposite of you. But that goes into being able to think critically about claims. Like the first step is, what if this is wrong? Like, let me investigate this.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. We got some chats going saying that they'd love the course. I know I would too. Dr. Lori Rose, pleasure as always. Thanks for talking about this today. Yeah, you can get the course, but holy cow, I hope they got their minds expanded a little bit just by listening today. So we appreciate you as always.